The paperwork was already open when the cooler latch clicked behind me, a flat metal sound I'd heard thousands of times before. The intake bay smelled like disinfectant and cold steel the way it always does after midnight. The fluorescent lights hummed steady and thin like they were monitoring me instead of the room. I was halfway through logging the transfer when I realized I had already checked the same line twice. Every embalmer learns the same 3 rules in their first year. They're not about respect. They're about liability. I trusted the rules because they worked. They worked when families were angry, when hospitals rushed, when mistakes wanted to hide inside paperwork. Rules keep you employed. Rules keep you licensed. Rules keep your name out of court records. I was verifying the hospital death certificate against the transfer sheet, reading it the way you read tax forms. Name, date, time pronounced, attending physician. No trauma listed, no autopsy hold, no medical examiner flag. On paper, it was a clean case. The gurney sat centered under the intake lights, wheels locked, zipper closed. The cooler behind me stayed at 36 degrees Fahrenheit, steady logged by the digital panel. I keyed the arrival time into the system and waited for the confirmation tone. It didn't come. Instead, the screen refreshed and flashed a warning I hadn't seen in months. Duplicate arrival window detected. 2 cases, same facility, same hour. That alone isn't an error. Hospitals batch transfers all the time. Still, I felt my jaw tighten once, just enough to notice. People who work near the dead learn early that silence usually means compliance, not peace. This job runs on quiet confirmations, not alarms. When something goes wrong, it almost never announces itself. I pulled the transfer tag from the gurney rail and held it under the light. White plastic, black print, barcode intact. The staple at the top sat a fraction of an inch off center, not missing, not broken, just wrong. Someone had reattached it. You could see where the plastic had been bent, then flattened again. The ink on the name was darker than the ink on the case number. Different pen, different hand. I didn't say anything. You don't say things at this stage. You document, you verify, you move forward. I logged into the intake software and pulled the hospital manifest again. 2 names populated the list. Different last names, different ages. Same arrival window, same wing. The system allowed it. The system didn't care. I scanned the barcode. The confirmation tone chimed short and flat. Approved for processing. That was the first moment something should have stopped me. But systems don't stop people. People stop themselves. I wheeled the gurney into prep room 2, the one closest to the cooler, the one we use for hospital deaths without holds. The wheels rolled cleanly over the epoxy floor and locked with a dull click. The room settled into its usual rhythm: ventilation, hiss, light, hum, distant compressor. I set the chart on the stainless counter and aligned it square with the edge. That's habit. Habits are how you avoid mistakes. Rule number 1 is simple. You never alter a body before identity confirmation is locked. Not cosmetics, not positioning, not even the mouth. Break it and you don't get a warning. You get a lawsuit. You get your license reviewed. You get your name typed into a report that never really goes away. I verified the wristband through the zipper, matching the number to the chart. The band was intact. The number matched. That should have been enough. I pulled on gloves and unzipped the bag to mid-chest, just enough to confirm presentation. Male. Hospital gown. No visible trauma. Skin tone consistent with refrigeration. No purge. I zipped it back up and stepped to the terminal to finalize intake. The system lagged, then refreshed again. Duplicate arrival window detected. I exhaled through my nose, slow controlled. The ventilation answered with a soft whoosh overhead. I told myself the same thing I've told myself for years. Hospitals rush, clerks make errors. The system catches what matters. I reopened the manifest and cross-checked the physician's signatures. 2 different doctors, same wing, same hour. That happens. I printed the internal tracking label and affixed it to the chart sleeve. The adhesive stuck cleanly. The printer chirped and went quiet. People who work near the dead understand something most people never see. The body is rarely the problem. The paperwork is. I moved to the cooler to log placement. Rack number, time, temperature confirmation. 36 degrees Fahrenheit stable. As I slid the gurney into place, I noticed the hospital toe tag inside the bag was looped, not knotted. ER staff usually knot them. Looping is what happens when someone is in a hurry. I paused with my hand on the rail. Counted 1 breath in, 1 breath out. Then I locked the rail and stepped back. No one believes us when we say the worst mistakes start small. They imagine chaos. They imagine panic. They don't imagine a quiet room that still follows every rule. Back at the terminal, I pulled up the second case from the same arrival window. Different name, different age. The status read in transit. That didn't make sense. The truck had already unloaded. The lights hummed again, just slightly louder than before. I felt a brief hitch in my breathing and let it pass. This was administrative, not anatomical. Chain of custody errors don't look like mistakes. They look like confirmations that arrived in the wrong order. I opened the audit trail and scrolled through the timestamps. Transfer logged at 11:42 p.m. Intake scan at 11:51. Rescan at 11:53. 2 scans. Same code. That was the first hard contradiction. I clicked back to the physical chart and checked the hospital seal sticker. It was intact, but the edge was wrinkled. Like it had been peeled back then pressed down again. My jaw clenched once harder this time. That was my frustration moment. It passed as quickly as it came. I told myself the same thing again. The system allowed it. The system recorded it. The system would flag it if it mattered. I finalized the intake and signed my name at the bottom of the screen. The confirmation tone chimed clean and final. Accepted. The room felt no different afterward. Same light, same hum, same cold air. That's the problem with institutional trust. You don't feel the moment it fails. I stepped out to wash my hands, watching the soap foam under the faucet, listening to the water hit the basin. The sink drained with a hollow gurgle and went quiet. When I turned back toward the prep room, the terminal screen had refreshed on its own. Duplicate arrival window resolved. No explanation, no note, just resolved. People who work near the dead rely on one biological certainty above all others. Once the chain of custody is broken, it doesn't heal itself. It only waits. I printed the finalized paperwork and slid it into the case folder. Everything was in order now. 2 in order. I stood there for a few seconds longer than necessary, listening to the lights, the ventilation, the distant compressor. The same sounds I'd trusted for years. The anomaly wasn't in the body. It wasn't in the room. It was in the sequence. The system said the case was clean. The system said move forward. So I did. And that's how it starts. The fluorescent lights were still humming when I pulled the restorative tray closer. The room was stainless steel and pale blue tile cold enough to tighten skin fast. The body bag was unzipped to mid-chest and the face was already exposed. I should have zipped it back up and walked away right then. Rule number 2 isn't a suggestion where I work. Never touch the body before the 72-hour identification window closes, even if the family begs. That rule exists because once you change something, you can't unchange it. And because the worst mistakes don't start with malice. My phone vibrated against the counter and the hum kept filling the gaps. The caller ID showed a local number, same area code as the hospital. I answered with my professional voice, the one that stays level on purpose. A woman spoke like she'd been awake for days. They're flying her granddaughter in tonight. She's 10, she said, steady, but worn. I don't want her last memory to be... That she added, and stopped breathing for a beat. I didn't ask what that meant, because I already knew. I looked at the face again and felt my throat tighten once. The chart said, minor accident, no hold, no medical examiner involvement. It was the kind of line that makes administrators move faster than they should. The hospital had documented bruising and swelling around the nose and cheek. Nothing dramatic, but enough to change what a child remembers forever. She emailed a photo while we were still on the call. A family picture taken in a driveway, bright summer light, a baseball cap. This is the photo they'll show at the funeral, she said. Like it was a rule. The screen lit my gloves for a second, then went dark again. I told her I couldn't because that was the correct answer. Then she said one line that wasn't dramatic, just factual and exhausted. He hated having his picture taken, she said, and this is all she has. My jaw tightened once, and I hated that it did. I knew the identity confirmation wasn't locked. The final release wasn't signed by the next of kin yet. The 72-hour clock hadn't even started running clean. I stared at the paperwork like it could take the decision for me. People who work near the dead learn how to keep their hands busy. Busy hands prevent shaky thoughts from turning into visible mistakes. I reached for the case folder and flipped to the checklist anyway. The hum stayed steady, and the silence felt like approval. I told myself the rule exists for careless people. I wasn't careless. That was the thought that made everything else possible. I felt a brief hitch in my breathing and forced it back down. I pulled the restorative wax kit from the lower cabinet and the one we don't use often. The kit had a wax warmer, a small alcohol lamp, and 3 spatulas with rounded tips. I set out a setting spray, a small jar of massage cream, and a flesh tone palette. Then I placed the lip former and eye caps beside the photo like I was preparing evidence. The procedural expectation is simple in this job. If you follow the sequence, the result stays predictable. If you break the sequence, the result becomes permanent. I told myself I was just restoring what the accident took. I warmed the wax until it went pliable, then rolled it between gloved fingers. I tested a small piece on the underside of the jawline where it wouldn't show. It should have blended with light pressure and a little massage cream. Instead, it pulled away in a thin sheet like it didn't want to adhere. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Not impossible, just wrong enough to register. I told myself the skin was too cold, and I raised the warmer setting slightly. The fluorescent hum answered me like it always did. I moved to the nose bridge and built a base layer thin and controlled. 2 strokes, then a pause, then 2 more, letting the shape form gradually. I used the spatula edge to feather the wax into surrounding tissue. It should have disappeared at the edges when I smoothed it. It didn't. The wax kept lifting at the margins, curling up like dried tape. I pressed it down again, and it sprang back the moment I let go. I stared at it and felt heat rise under my collar. That was the first micro-reveal that this wasn't going to be clean. Wax doesn't argue with you when you're doing it right. It behaves like an obedient material because chemistry is consistent. This was acting like it had its own preference. No one believes us when we say the job can turn on a detail that small. They think it's all dramatic scenes and strange stories. They don't see the quiet friction between procedure and reality. They just see the finished face and assume it was always going to work. I switched to a different compound, a softer wax with more oil, and tried again. I dabbed massage cream on the tissue, then applied a thinner layer. For a few seconds, it held, and I felt that false relief begin. Then it separated again cleanly, like it had never touched skin at all. I looked back at the photo and compared angles. The sun in the picture had a slightly crooked smile and a narrow nose tip. The mouth on the table was wider, the upper lip fuller than the photo suggested. That should not have mattered yet, because I wasn't changing the mouth. But my hands were already moving toward the mouth. I picked up the lip former, the small plastic piece meant to control shape. That tool is for restorations after confirmed identification. I used it anyway. This is where the procedural line snapped in my head. Rule number 2 wasn't about time, not really. It was about consent and certainty. And I was choosing to treat my certainty like consent. I set the lip former gently and adjusted the corners of the mouth. A light pressure, then a wipe, then a second light pressure. The tissue resisted in a way it shouldn't after refrigeration. Not movement, just stiffness in the wrong direction. My hands paused over the face, and the hum filled the gap again. I was watching my own work like it belonged to someone else. That is how cognitive dissonance keeps you functional. You act and you pretend you're only observing. I built the cheek line next, using wax to soften the swelling. A thin layer, then feathered edges, then a light dusting of setting powder. The powder should have locked it down and removed shine. Instead, it clumped in one spot, darkening a patch along the cheek. That was the second contradiction, and it hit harder than the first. Powder clumps when moisture is wrong or when texture isn't what it should be. I pressed a gauze pad against the area and lifted it away. The wax came with it, like it was peeling off a label. I stared at the gauze, and my jaw tightened again, just for a second. This wasn't artistry now. This was correction chasing a problem that wasn't supposed to exist. And the longer I chased it, the more permanent it became. People who work near the dead share one pain point that never goes away. A procedural expectation gets violated, and you can't explain it to anyone. You can only keep moving because stopping creates questions and witnesses. I kept moving. I increased the room temperature by 2 degrees on the wall control. The cooler air should have softened slightly and helped adhesion. I waited 1 minute and tried another thin layer on the nose. The wax held longer this time, and my shoulders loosened. Then it began to sweat at the edges. Not liquid, just a subtle sheen like the wax was warming from underneath. That isn't how it works on a refrigerated face. I told myself the room heat was too high and lowered it again. The hum stayed the same and the room stayed calm. That calm is what makes you dangerous to yourself. You can do the wrong thing in perfect silence, and silence doesn't correct you. I looked at the photo again and felt a small surge of confidence. The nose shape was closer now, and the cheek line looked softer. I told myself I was restoring, not inventing. I told myself the family deserved one clean memory. That was my last rational thought before the major reveal landed. I leaned closer, angled the overhead light, and saw the skin texture clearly. The pores and hair pattern along the jaw didn't match the photo structure. Not because of the accident, but because of the face itself. I didn't say it out loud. I just stared, and the hum closed the paragraph for me. I should have stopped then. Instead, I did what professionals do when they're trapped by their own logic. I made the work look better. I made it look finished. I blended the edges with massage cream and sealed the wax with spray. I set the mouth line one last time and softened the corners. I adjusted the eyelids with a small dab of adhesive, then removed the excess. Those steps were clean, quick, and irreversible. When I stepped back, it looked good. Not perfect, but good enough for a child's last memory. I compared the face to the photo and felt that sick, quiet pride. I saved the day I told myself and believed it. The hum in the lights never changed. The paperwork on the counter stayed unsigned. The 72-hour window stayed open on the clock, and I closed the bag halfway up the chest anyway. I washed my hands and watched the wax residue swirl down the drain. I didn't log the restoration in the case notes because that would make it real. I set the photo face down and turned off the wax warmer. I told myself no one will ever know. Then the terminal in the corner refreshed on its own. A notification appeared where there hadn't been one before. Pending identity verification. Do not alter remains. The hum filled the room again, steady and thin like it was documenting me. I stared at the warning and didn't touch the keyboard. Because if I acknowledged it, I'd have to explain why I didn't listen. And explanations are where investigations begin. The wax warmer was still cooling when I tightened the last hinge screw on the casket lid. The funeral home chapel looked clean in that early light, all beige carpet and soft gray walls. The overhead cans were dimmed low, and the track lights hit the face at a flattering angle. The same fluorescent hum from the prep hallway leaked under the door anyway. Rule number 3 is the one nobody puts on a brochure. Never alter a body to match what the family wants to remember, only restore what was there. Because once you improve someone, you own the lie. And if the lie breaks, it breaks on your name. I checked the cosmetics one last time with a handheld pen light 3 inches off the cheek. No shine, no wax lift, no powder clumps. The mouth line was set clean, corners soft, not forced. I stepped back and compared it to the photo I'd printed from her email. It matched close enough that my stomach unclenched. That was the problem. It felt like success. I walked the case folder to the office counter and set it beneath a stamp pad. Chain of custody forms on top hospital transfer sheet under that internal checklist clipped in front. The pending identification verification warning was still in the system, but not on the paper. On paper, it looked finished. I heard the front door chime, and the hum in the hallway stayed constant. The family arrived early, which is normal when people are trying not to fall apart. I adjusted my tie and went to meet them with my face set neutral. A man and a woman and a small girl in a coat that was too big. The girl's eyes went straight to the casket. The adults tried not to look like staring would make it real faster. The mother was the woman from the phone, and she moved like her joints hurt. She thanked me before I said anything, like she needed to place the gratitude somewhere. I kept my voice even and walked them through the viewing rules in plain language. No touching the cosmetics. No leaning on the lid. If anyone feels faint, we sit them down. I said it like procedure, because procedure keeps emotion from flooding the room. The director's desk phone rang right then, sharp and too loud for the quiet. 1 ring, then 2, then the kind of pause that means it's not a spam call. I watched the director glance at me and look away, like he didn't want to share the weight. He answered, listened, and his face went flat. He covered the receiver and said, "Hospital morgue online." The words felt heavier than they should have. He handed me the phone without a question. The voice on the other end was clipped and professional, the way people sound when they're trying to outrun liability. "We need you to stop the service," the woman said. "We sent the wrong body." I didn't respond right away because my brain was waiting for a second sentence. There wasn't one. Just that statement, final and clean. The hum in the hallway filled the gap. I asked for the decedent's name and the hospital case number slow and clear. She gave them, then added, "Our tag fell off during transfer." She didn't apologize. She just explained. People who work near the dead share one professional expectation that never changes. The chain of custody is supposed to be unbreakable once it leaves the hospital. If it breaks in silence, then shows up as a lawsuit. I stared at the casket and felt my throat tighten once. I said, "We already prepped him," and my voice came out steady. The woman on the phone paused, then asked, "What do you mean prepped?" I didn't answer that because the answer had a list of tools in it. She said, "We have the correct remains here, like that fixed anything." I hung up and looked at the director. He already knew what I was going to say because he'd seen this once before. He nodded like permission, but it wasn't permission. It was survival pragmatism. The mother had moved closer to the casket while I was on the phone. She didn't touch it, but she stood at the edge like gravity pulled her there. The little girl took one step forward, then stopped. The mother's hands were clasped so tightly, her knuckles went pale. I walked to the lid and put my hand on the latch, careful and slow. Tactile contact felt wrong, like I was admitting something by touching it. I released the latch and lifted the lid with both hands controlled. The hinges whispered and settled. The face was lit exactly the way I'd set it. Warm tones, soft shadow under the cheek. The mouth line looked calm, almost sleeping. For half a second, it looked like what I'd promised on the phone. Then the mother didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She didn't move at all. That was worse than any reaction. Silence is where facts take shape. She stared for a long moment, eyes fixed on the forehead, not the mouth. I watched her gaze track to the left temple. The place I hadn't looked at this morning because I didn't want to find anything new. Her breathing stayed shallow and quiet. She turned to me and asked one question, flat as a form. "Who is this?" The words hit, like a drop in a sink that doesn't stop echoing. The little girl looked up at her confused. The director took a step back, like distance could protect him. The hum in the hallway didn't change. I said the name from the paperwork because that's what the system tells you to do. The mother shook her head once, small and certain. "My son has a burn scar," she said, and tapped her own temple lightly. "Right here, from a grill." He was 14. I looked at the temple under the light and saw nothing. No discoloration, no texture shift, no scar tissue line. Just smooth skin I had smoothed on purpose. My stomach dropped like an elevator cable had snapped. I pulled the intake photo up on my phone without thinking, thumb moving on instinct. The hospital intake image was still in the portal time-stamped watermark in the corner. There it was clear as a legal exhibit. A small burn scar on the left temple, crescent-shaped. The face in the casket didn't have it, because I had already changed the face. That was the major reveal, and it didn't require drama. It was a missing detail in the wrong place. It was an absence that had a shape. It was proof. No one believes us when we say you can destroy someone's identity with good intentions. They think identity lives in a name, not in a scar. They think restoration is harmless. They don't understand that memory is a material. My hands went cold and I looked down without meaning to. There was still wax under my nails, pale and stubborn in the creases. The sculpting spatula I'd used was sitting in my mental inventory, sharp and proud. I wanted to throw up. I swallowed and forced my eyes back up. The mother was still staring at the face, like it was a stranger wearing something familiar. The little girl leaned forward just enough to see, then pulled back fast. Her lips parted like she was about to ask a question she didn't have words for. I tried to speak, and my voice caught for a fraction of a second. I cleared my throat and said, "The hospital made a mistake." That sentence was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The mother didn't react to the hospital part. She reacted to me. She looked at my hands, then back at the face, then back at me. Her eyes weren't angry yet. They were empty in a way that made anger look kind. She said, "You changed him." I didn't deny it. Denial would have been an insult to the evidence. I said I tried to restore what was damaged and heard how weak it sounded. My jaw clenched once hard and I let it go. The director stepped in and said, "We need to close the lid," calm and gentle. He reached for the hinge, and the mother raised a hand not to stop him, but to mark time. She said, "My daughter is 10, and nodded toward the little girl. "This is what she gets." That wasn't a scream. That was a verdict. I stepped away from the casket because standing close felt criminal. The director closed the lid slowly, and the hinge whispered again. The latch clicked. The room stayed quiet. The phone in the office rang again, and the same desk phone, same sharp sound. The director didn't answer this time. He looked at me, and his expression said, "Don't make this louder." Institutional silence is not an accident. It's a tactic. I walked back into the hall and opened the case folder like it could protect me. The chain of custody form was still clipped in place, neat and official. The hospital transfer sheet still carried the wrong certainty. Everything that mattered was typed in black ink. That's the strangest part of professional failure. The paper stays calm. The consequences don't. Within an hour, there were 2 calls from 2 different numbers. One was the hospital risk manager. One was an attorney who didn't introduce himself as an attorney. He just asked, "Did you alter the remains before identification was confirmed?" I didn't answer right away. The hum from the prep hallway was still there, faint but constant. I heard my own breathing and realized it was shallow. I said yes because the truth was now a record. They asked for my license number next. They asked for the embalmer of record signature. They asked for the full restorative materials list, including brand names. That's how you know it's not about grief anymore. I sat at the desk and stared at the form titled Incident Report. The director slid it toward me without speaking. There was a line for deviation from protocol, and it was blank. My pen hovered over it like it weighed 5 pounds. People think embalming rules exist because bodies are dangerous. They don't. They exist because people are. The family never sued. Not in the way everyone expects. They just asked one question and it stayed in the room after they left. Why did you think you had the right to decide if this story made you uncomfortable? That reaction matters. People think these jobs are about bodies. They're not. They're about decisions no one else wants to make. If you believe rules exist for a reason, let me know. And if you think compassion sometimes crosses a line, say that too. I read every comment, especially the ones that disagree. If you want more real stories from inside places, people don't like to think about stories where the horror comes from procedure, not monsters, then subscribe. It helps this channel reach the people who understand silence better than noise. If you know someone who thinks mistakes like this could never happen, share this with them. And before you leave, answer one question. Honestly, was I wrong, or was I just human? I'll see you in the comments.